Welcome to the ATP Projects. You as your host, Steve, Jeff, and Dean Karnazes. How are you, mate?
Good day, gentlemen. How are you?
Actually, that was a pretty good day from an American.
He used to live in Sydney. You know?
Oh, no wonder. No wonder he's got it down pat.
So he's semi-Australian. Is that correct?
I'm speaking Aussie today, mate.
That's great. Now, Dean is very, very famous throughout the world and in the running community particularly because he is I won't do you justice, but an ultra marathon runner, and there's plus added to that because he is a superstar in the running game. And I found out about Dean many years ago where a guy I used to work for, Peter Derrick, who's since passed away, he was a distance runner. And he said, there's this guy in America who runs all night. And I'm going, why does he run all night? What has he got a job? What's going on? But, and so he gave me this book, your first book, Confessions of an All-Night Runner, I think was the title.
Wow, okay.
And I read it. And I'll ask Jeff a question first. What do you do after you go out drinking?
Collapse normally.
Collapse, yeah.
Yep.
I do the same. But on your 30th birthday, Dean, what did you do after you went out drinking?
Yeah, I decided to run 30 miles in my underwear.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that's about 50 kilometers.
Yeah. Wow. And it's funny, actually. Steve has been mentioning a little bit about you, Dean. And I heard about you probably a couple of years ago when we were talking about running and extreme events. And there was two things that stuck out. And I've actually got a little cheat sheet here. But it was one that you had won a marathon in all 50 states in 50 days. And the other one was that you had run in Death Valley at like 120 degree Fahrenheit plus heat, which is, Steve, what's that in centigrade or Celsius?
49 degrees centigrade was that race.
It's just incredible.
Well, he's done it. We were talking about, of course, the Badwater Ultramarathon.
Right.
And it's the worst designed race in the world.
Yep.
Hottest time of year, hottest time of day. You go from the lowest part of America to probably the highest part, Mount McKinley. Dean, do you want to tell us about Badwater? Because you've actually run the race a few times, haven't you?
Well, I've done it 10 times, actually. Wow. So maybe then speak too highly of my intelligence. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I've done it when the temperature's been up to 52, and you run on the white line because the asphalt, the pavement, the tarmac gets up to it gets over 75 or 80 degrees, and it'll melt your shoes. So you run on the white line, it's a bit cooler, and it's I've won the race, but I don't say I won. I say I survived the fastest.
Wow,
because
that's a great way to put it. I mean, 80 degrees
about
is
racing.
Yeah. That's the same temperature you cook things in the oven, right? So I mean, it's incredible.
Incredibly.
Well, it's one of those places you can crack an egg on the asphalt, and then it'll sizzle. You put down a little butter and you crack your egg, and it cooks it right up.
Wow.
Well, the race starts at the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, which is Badwater. And it's 282 feet below sea level. So, about 90 meters below sea level. And 135 miles from there is the highest point in the contiguous U.S., which is called Mount Whitney. And Mount Whitney is almost 5,000 meters. So it's a mountain. And the idea is to run from the lowest point to the highest point. And you basically run through hell in between the two. You name some of the places you pass through. You pass through Furnace Creek. You pass through Stovepipe Wells. You pass through Dante's Peak. Devil's Postpile. I mean, the list goes on and on. But at a point you put on a UV protective suit, almost like a white suit, because even if you have sunblock on, it'll blister your skin.
Wow.
So that's how you kind of take that race on, and it's a very elite field, and still a lot of the runners never reach the finish line.
Oh, I can imagine why. I mean, obviously, Dean, for somebody like myself who maybe played a little bit of football, bit of sports. Running has never been my thing, and I appreciate you've got a book. Actually, we'll give you a little bit of a plug. And Dean, you're a very successful author, but a runner's high. Now, the title of the book actually is something that I've heard a lot about as far as this high that runners get. I never ran far enough or long enough, I think, to get it. But in terms of running, I mean, and what you're doing is obviously you would be the top 1% of the 1% as far as your running is concerned. But how did you get into this extreme? Were you a track and field athlete? Were you running at school? And what led to your progression to running these sort of extreme things, because it's absolutely fascinating, and also the 50 marathons in 50 days. I mean, that's incredible. Finishing, I think, with the New York Marathon that you run in around 3 hours, which is it's cracking. I mean, you're an absolutely ridiculous specimen of a human being. But I mean, where did this madness come from?
Well, I used to run home from kindergarten when I was a young boy. When I was 5 years old, I remember running home. And some of my earliest childhood recollections are, running literally, miles and miles from the school back to my house. And I ran competitively when I was in high school as a first former, a freshman. And we won the championships. And I figured that's as far as I can take my running career. And literally, I then moved to Australia. So I was an exchange student, and I lived in Sydney for a year. And that's where my passion for surfing was born. So I started surfing and got very competitive into surfing. And then I came back to the United States. I finished uni, I finished a graduate school, and then I got a business degree, which is called an MBA. And I had a very comfortable corporate job in San Francisco. And on the night of my 30th birthday, I was, as we talked about, in a pub with me mates, celebrating the way a lot of us do on our 30th birthday. I was getting pissed as a lizard. I remember that. And at midnight, they said, let's have another round of tequila to celebrate. And I said, no, I'm gonna go run 30 miles to celebrate instead, which again is around 49, 50 kilometers.
Man.
And they said to me, but you're not a runner, you're drunk. And I said, I am, but I'm still going to do it. And I walked out of this pub. I didn't own running gear, but I had on these comfortable silk boxer shorts, this silk underwear. And I peeled off my pants and threw them down the alleyway and just started stumbling into the night, knowing there's a town called Half Moon Bay that was 30 miles away. And I somehow, over the course of about 8 or 9 hours, I made it 30 miles.
Man, I tell you
and
what.
I decided I didn't want to be a business guy anymore. I wanted to be an ultra marathoner. So that's how it was, that's how my passion for running was, rekindled. And then I started running. I started running around San Francisco where I live, and I thought I was a pretty good runner. And one day, 2 guys passed me climbing up a hill, and I thought I was like one of the strongest guys out there running up hills. And these guys were a different species. I mean, they took running and endurance to the next level. And I got to the top of the hill, and they're up there doing push-ups. And I asked them, I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, we're training for a race. And I said, well, how far is the race? And they said, well, it's 50 miles. So that's about 78 kilometers. And I looked at them, I said, well, how many days will this take? Where are the campgrounds or the hotels along the way? And they said, no, the gun goes off and you start running and there's no hotels. I mean, the finish line is the finish line. And, when you cross it, you're done. And then the other guy looked at me and said, if you cross it, kind of, insinuating that only certain guys, had the right stuff to actually run 50 miles. So I thought I got to learn about this race. And I learned about the race. I went and did the race, and running 50 continuous miles almost killed me.
Yeah.
It was the toughest thing I'd ever done. I mean, it laid me out, and I'll never forget. I was in the medical tent afterward, wrapped in one of those Mylar space blankets, that they put runners in, shivering, my muscles are cramping. And I see those same 2 guys, and they're giving each other a high five.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And they said, I hear them saying we qualified. And I'm thinking, for the insane asylum? Like, well, what did you qualify for? And they said, no, we qualified for the Western States 100-mile endurance run. And I said, hold it, twice as far as this? And they said, yeah, it's twice as far. And I said, well, where do you sleep at night? And they said, you don't. You just put on a headlamp and you keep running.
Wow.
And that whole notion of that, I couldn't wrap my head around it. But the last thing they said before they walked off is they said, hey, buddy, you qualified as well. And when they said that to me, I realized that I would never live down that moment for the rest of my life unless I tried it. I would forever say, you had qualified. They said you qualified, and you never took up the challenge. So I signed up for this 100-mile race, and was ludicrous.
How did you go? So the first time you're at the starting line, tell me a little bit about the preparation that you had done. Were you prepared? Even I'm thinking even the 50-mile race. I just cannot, but personally, I just cannot imagine that. Steve runs, about 10, 12 Ks every morning, right?
I did 12 this morning, and I'm still sore in the legs from my 12 kilometers or 8 miles this morning.
And there's probably other runners. I am not a runner, right? I'm just not a runner, but I really respect it and appreciate it. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around, as a lay person who's not really a runner. Okay, you've gone 50 miles. Then you go to 100 miles. Were you prepared? How did you go? What happened to your body? Let us know, Dean.
Yeah, so I'll never forget, at the starting line, the guy who was going to fire the gun for us to start, he looked around and he said, look at the blokes next to you. He said, half of you guys won't make it to the finish line. And he said, those of you that do make it, you will be forever changed by the experience. You will cross the finish line as a different person than the one that's standing here at this moment. You will learn more about yourself in the course of 100 miles than you knew in a previous lifetime.
Wow.
And that proved to be true. I never thought I could dig so deep. There are moments during that run where I thought, I can't move another, 2 meters up the trail. How am I going to run another 50 kilometers?
Wow.
It was so daunting. And, your muscles are cramping. You're crossing a river in the middle of the night, and holding onto a little rope, trying not to get swept downstream. You've got a headlamp on. You're trying to see this. It's a dark trail too. You're running 100 miles, not just on a well-lit, highway. You're running on a wilderness trail in the mountains. So, you're dealing with the elements. You're dealing with what animals could be out there, bears, mountain lions, whatever, snakes. So the whole thing was just quite overwhelming. And, there's a saying with this race, and I now think it's very true. They say you run, the first half of the 100-mile race with your legs and the second half with your mind. Yeah. So I think it was more of a mental thing than a physical thing.
How many people were at the starting line when you got there for the 50 and then for the 100-mile race?
For the 50, there were about 100 people there. And for the 100, it's, this race I'm describing is the most celebrated 100-mile foot race in the world. So there were about 350 people.
Wow.
At that race.
Wow. Well, and how many of them finished, Dean?
I think that year, maybe 200, maybe 180 to 200.
And is it becoming more popular? Is the amount of people doing this becoming more popular? Obviously you're riding and what you're saying is very inspirational, but yeah, is it becoming more popular or?
Yeah, the ultra running community is growing globally like crazy. It's still a relatively small amount of people. When you look at some, like a large ultra marathon, some of the biggest will have maybe 500 participants. And at the New York City Marathon, for instance, there was 55,000. So it's nowhere close to the size of like a big city marathon. But you might even notice, can you see the shirt I'm wearing? It says the Black All 100.
Yes. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, you probably know where Black All is. It's not far. It's on the Sunshine Coast, so it's not far from you.
Oh yeah.
And I ran that race a couple of years ago. So these ultra marathons are all around the world, and there's actually quite a thriving ultra running community in Australia.
Wow.
So tell me if I've got some things here again, Dean, and I know that you've been attacked by a wild animal, a coyote, which is just I don't mean hilarious in a. It's just so absurd. So you spoke about bears. I know that you've run, and sorry, that's the Kiwi. I say bears instead of bears. I don't know. And then you've got extreme heat, like you've got in Death Valley. And then I know that you've also ran in, was it the Antarctic or the Arctic? I forget. So do you want to sort of speak about maybe some of those more bizarre moments, whether it be heat, weather, coyote attacks? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, that was the first time I've ever been attacked by an animal other than a dog. I've run all over the world, and most often, it's runners get attacked by dogs.
Right.
Yeah, so, the coyotes typically don't attack people. I think I got attacked because I was carrying food,
right,
and it was going for my food. But there's something here called mountain lions, and they actually do attack people. But they say you never see a mountain lion. They sneak up on you.
Right.
I've seen a lot of bears while I've been running. I've seen rattlesnakes. The most probably problematic animal is the domestic dog.
Yeah.
For runners, a lot of runners, including myself, have been attacked by dogs. In Australia last year, I was in Australia for a race, and there was this dog that looked like a werewolf almost, a massive dog that came running out at me, and I thought, I'm going to lose my life here. But apparently it's a dog that keeps kangaroos out of sheep farms. So you might know of these dogs. This was in northern New South Wales, and I don't know the breed that it was called, but it's a dog that's probably as high as my chest. It was massive.
Oh wow!
And that was one of the scarier encounters I've ever had. But it didn't seem interested in me.
I've got to say, I'm a bit ignorant where it comes to a lot of these things. We've actually
You've got a vicious dog. What are you talking about?
I have a dog that even you wouldn't be afraid of, Dean. It's a miniature long-haired dachshund, so like he's not going to do anything to you. But yeah, I appreciate dogs. Probably going to be one of those things, as you say, probably because of the abundance of them. But there are some of those protective. Actually, one of the girls here, what's Penny? That Nadine's got. She's got a dog that actually sits with the sheep, and they actually look like sheep. I don't. You've seen those before? Mirror or something. Anyway.
They look like collies.
But in terms, then, I guess of the most scariest moments, like. What have been you said before with that big dog that came out where you thought you were going to lose your life, but what are the scariest moments for you, Dean? Like where you've been the most concerned? I'd love to hear sort of the range of experience, because it just sounds like it's so extreme that the emotions, as you're saying, in terms of what you've been able to achieve and accomplish, but some of the most terrifying moments as well too. So maybe we start with some of the most terrifying moments, or the things that you've been most concerned about, and maybe we talk then about some of the most elative moments, if we can.
Sure. One thing that I reflect on is I once ran a marathon to the South Pole, which is the coldest place on Earth, and that was quite extreme in that you can't breathe in that super chilled air, because it'll freeze your lungs and freeze your trachea. So you've got to wear a neoprene muffler in front of your face. You wear a balaclava over your head and goggles. You can't let any of your skin be exposed to the air, because you'll get frostbite. So a group of us went down there to try to do this marathon, and I was supposed to be home in 10 days. 31 days later, I stumbled back to my door.
Oh, wow.
My wife said, "It's good to see you. We're getting a bit worried."
Wow. Man, you must have an amazing wife.
She's pretty tolerant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I go down to the shops to grab some apples, and I happen to grab some other things and talk to a friend, and it's like, it's World War III. It's like, where have you been? It's like, you turn up, 3 weeks late and in one of the most hostile areas in the world, and your wife's like, oh, getting a bit worried.
Amazing. Now, Dean, speaking of being absent from home for a long time, you ran you went on a run once that lasted for about, you talk about 100 miles. What about 3,000 miles? You ran, I don't know why you didn't fly, but you ran across America? What's that all about?
Yeah, I don't own a car, and I wanted to see America, so I figured
it's very Forrest Gumpish, right?
It was amazing. Yeah, and here's something that's pretty unbelievable, but true. As you're running on this course from Los Angeles to New York, you pass through Washington D.C. And as I'm running into Washington D.C., I get a call on my cell phone, and they say, "Hey, there's someone at the White House that wants to meet you."
Wow.
And I'm thinking, oh, okay, sure. Who is this person? They said, well, her name is Michelle. And I'm thinking, Michelle, like a sous chef, in the kitchen, or like one of the security details. So I said, well, Michelle who? Does she have a last name? And they said, well, her last name is Obama. Do you know who that is?
Wow.
Do you know who that is?
Yeah. So you met Michelle Obama.
They're asking me if I knew. They said, they said, we know you've been out there running for a long time. Like, do you know who Michelle Obama is? I'm like, yeah, I know. Of course, I know who the first lady is. So as I'm running across, it's called Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the street that runs right in front of the White House.
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue was the White House. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
The gates swing open and a guard, holding a big automatic weapon, says, "Hey, come on in. She's waiting for you."
Wow.
I literally run through the gate of the White House and run right down the hallway of the White House.
Oh, wow.
I'm running past these presidential busts, and all these ancient libraries, and I'm thinking, God, I'm probably ruining their carpet with these shoes I'm wearing. But I see the press secretary, and she says, "Hang a left. Michelle's out in the garden waiting for you." So I hang a left. I run out to the South Garden, and there's Michelle Obama.
Wow.
Waiting to greet me. So that was, and I'd been running for 65 days. I don't even know the last time I showered.
Oh, wow. So did you spend much time in the White House or speaking with Michelle Obama?
Yeah, she had a reception for me.
Oh, wow.
She invited some kids. She gave a presentation. She honored me. She brought out the presidential dog.
Wow.
I got to run around with her dog. Yeah, it was quite an experience.
That's cool. Well, that must have been between 2000 and
11, I think you did that race, was it? Or you'd know?
Yeah, because he was president from 2004 to 2012. Is that right? I forget. No.
Yeah, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Amazing.
And in terms of so that's right up there on one of the absolute top pinnacles. Anything else? I mean, again, you were mentioning obviously the South Pole. I mean, I just can't imagine that.
You did it in running shoes, and I think you did it in about 8 hours or something. Was that right, Dean?
I think it took even longer than that. I mean, it was amazing that we lived, actually, because trying to run through those deep snow drifts, it was like running through sand drifts that were coming up to your knees. So every step was laborious, and the wind, there's these katabatic winds that blow down there. The wind was ferocious, and one of the runners, I'll never forget, I'm running next to another runner, and he just tipped over. You get such bad vertigo. You can't, because all you see is white. You're just running into this white. You can't tell if you're going up or down or left or right. And it was very disorienting. So it was one of those things where in hindsight, it's amazing we all lived.
Wow. It's pretty incredible. In terms of what you've learned from running, Dean, because it's funny what you said about how it was a life-changing moment for you, where you were 30 years old, down in Sydney, decided to go for a crazy run, and that was a moment that changed your life. I know that you're involved with charities. Obviously, there are some incredible insights, not into yourself, but helping other people. I mean, you've written some fantastic books as well too. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of your philanthropy projects and other things like that?
Well, running is a very self-absorbing, somewhat selfish sport. So I like to use my running to help others. It gives it deeper meaning than just one guy going out there running by himself. So I've raised millions of dollars for charity, and that makes me very proud. I've also served as a U.S. athlete ambassador on these sports diplomacy envoys, and it's a way for America actually to gain influence and power through soft diplomacy. And I think that you guys would agree that sports unites people in a way that politics really doesn't.
Yeah.
So most recently, I was just actually in Fiji, not far from Australia, and I did a run through kind of the outback of Fiji. And, having some of these kids come out and run with me barefoot on these, rocky, rooted trails, and they'd run with me for 10, 20 kilometers.
Crazy.
Giggling, laughing. We had a great time. And then they turn around and run back home.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And their feet were so toughened, and they just thought it was the greatest thing to meet an American guy. They'd never seen an American before. And here I am running with them, giving them energy bars, and we just had a great time. So running is a very uniting sport. There's so many things in this world that divide us, be it the color of our skin or the God we worship or our socioeconomic class, whatever. But running is something we all share in common. It's a commonality that all humans have. I mean, we all put one foot in front of the other, and that's how we run.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Most people actually, when they turn up for a running race, actually drive there or get driven there. Sometimes, Dean, you don't bother driving to a running race. Sometimes you run to start a race. I know that sounds bizarre, and our listeners are confused now. So you want to tell us some of the stories where you haven't driven to the race, you've actually run to the race to start a running race, a long one.
Yeah, I kind of, whenever possible, I try not to run to the start of a run. So
you have, haven't you? You've done that a few times, haven't you?
Like the Boston Marathon, for instance.
Yeah.
If anyone listening has done the Boston Marathon, you know that all the hotels are at the finish line, and you get on buses and you drive out 26.2 miles or 42.2 kilometers to the start, and then you run back to where the bus took you from. So I just get up a few hours early and I run from the hotel out to the starting line instead of getting on a bus and then run back. It's my way of kind of doing a double marathon, but also thinking, I didn't get in a bus to get to the start. I actually used my own power. But I've run further than that. I mean, I've run up to a place called the Napa Valley, which is the wine country of California. So I've run
fantastic.
100 miles, so 162 kilometers. I've run to the start of a marathon, the Napa Valley Marathon, and then ran the marathon.
So when you're at home and you're not running anything in particular, I mean, how often how far do you run on an average day? I mean, obviously you'd be running almost every day, or is that just a bad misconception from me?
Well, I do a couple things. I don't just run, I cross train, because I think if you just run, that's a recipe for disaster and overuse injuries. So, one thing I do religiously is if I don't have to sit down, like if I'm not driving somewhere or getting driven somewhere, or I'm not on a plane, from the moment I get out of bed until the moment I go back to sleep, I never sit down. So even right now, I'm standing up.
I can tell. Yeah. Actually, I was going to ask you, I think you're standing right now during this interview, right?
You're standing up, and when I do all my writing, like when I write my books, when I do my email correspondence, everything else, I do it standing up.
Yeah.
So I'm bouncing on my toes throughout the course of the day. And people say, isn't that exhausting being on your feet all day? It's actually, to me, less exhausting than sitting down all day.
Well, they say that sitting's the new smoking, right? So
yeah, that's what I think. And I also do a lot of cross training with body weight exercises. So
right.
Push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and chair dips, and something called burpees.
Yeah.
So horrible. I do this. They're horrible. I hate them, but they're so good. They're so good for you. You know?
Yeah.
I have this saying: learn to love what you hate.
That's it.
And burpees are one of those things. Yeah.
So
I'm doing this HIIT routine throughout the course of the day, and then I'm following generally what's called a hard easy protocol. So one day I'll run hard and shorter duration, maybe 8 to 10 miles, but at a really decent pace. And then the next day I might run, twice that far. So maybe, 30 or maybe 40 kilometers, but at a slower pace. So I'm changing it up all the time. I'm not always running this just the same, race at the same training run at the same pace every day. I'm always changing up what I'm doing.
I've got to ask you about one race you did in 2005 where you ran, we're talking about the 100-mile races. Dean entered a race 350 miles, I believe it was. How did you – it's not measured in hours, it's measured in days.
Yeah.
How did you go with that, Dean?
350. So that's like
it's 550 kilometers approximately.
Jeez.
That's over 10 marathons.
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget, on that I can get through 2 nights without sleep, okay? But a third night without sleep was impossible. And I remember waking up in the middle of the road and thinking, why am I running in the middle of the road? So I kind of meander back over to the roadside, and then it happened again. I woke up and I'm running in the middle of the road, and I realized I was sleep running.
Wow.
I was just so exhausted. I was falling asleep, but I was, I guess, subconsciously willing my body to keep going. So I didn't fall over or anything. I just kept running. And
that's So you've got a support team. You've got people that are watching you, right? But Do you know how long you were doing that for? Like,
Actually, I
where
was
you
on my
almost
own.
lost consciousness, right? And then you just keep running.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look back and it was, maybe 20, 30 seconds, I think I was asleep.
Wow.
And it was when you remember when you're in uni and you're kind of cramming for an exam and you're staying up all night and you're studying and all of a sudden you find your head in your book.
Yeah.
Mm.
It was that kind of experience. I kind of just woke up and I realized, I was just asleep and I was running.
It's
fascinating.
It's phenomenal.
So at the end of 3 days, I mean, most people stay away for 3 days, and I think it's relatively well known that obviously you start having hallucinations and things like that. Anything weird like happened towards the end of the race for you, outside of sleep running, which I don't. Well, you must be in a very rare club there, Dean.
Well, I remember at the finish, it was in the evening, so the early evening, and I was running shirtless. It was hot during the day, and I generated so much internal body heat that my body was overheating. So I was running shirtless, and I remember looking around at the people at the finish. We're drinking champagne and celebrating, and it dawned on me that everyone standing around me was in jackets, big puffy jackets, and I realized it was cold out. And within a moment of realizing that, I went into hypothermia.
Wow.
I just started shivering uncontrollably. And I remember they put me on the ground and they put me in a mummy bag, like a sleeping bag that basically just covers everything except for your face. And I remember being in this mummy bag and then thinking I'm really hungry. So I just remember opening my mouth, just saying food, food. And they were putting spoonfuls of something in my mouth. I thought it was maybe peanut butter or yogurt. I couldn't tell what it was. And then all of a sudden I woke up and it was the next morning and I had this gritty taste in my mouth. And I said, what did you guys feed me last night? And they said, it was hummus. That's all we had was hummus.
Wow.
So I ate a whole carton of hummus.
Wow. Wow.
Nice.
So actually it's a good intro, because I've been meaning to ask this as well too. I mean, obviously putting your body through those kind of extremes. Have you learned anything, or is there anything as far as your rituals are concerned with regards to your nutrition? I mean, I know that a lot of long distance, ultra long distance runners, carb load and do things like that. But is there anything in terms of, even electrolytes, because I appreciate cramping could potentially be a problem. I'm not sure, Dean. Amino acids to help with recovery. Have you ever had or come close to having anything like rhabdomyolysis or anything like that?
Yeah, I've never had Rabco. I've never peed blood, but I certainly have a lot of friends that have.
Right.
And I think that a lot of the people that I know, at least, they were taking a lot of anti-inflammatories, so like ibuprofen, and I think that's maybe what induced it.
Yeah,
your muscles.
Yeah, and for those that are listening that don't know, rhabdomyolysis is effectively where the muscle tissue effectively
breaks down,
yeah, or tissue breaks down big time.
Cope, yeah,
and the kidneys get overloaded, right? Yeah. Yep. So yeah, as Dean said, you can pass blood through your urine,
it's
which
fatal too.
Yeah, people have died from it. Yep.
It can be. In fact, in 2018, I did that same Western States 100-mile endurance run, and there were a couple Aussies that I know that did the race, and one of them, he did quite well, and the next day he started peeing blood, and he said, they said, we better take you to the emergency room, and then he started to actually deteriorate from there, and he was in intensive care for I think 10 days in the ICU. Wow. So it was very serious, and it was kind of a delayed response.
Yeah.
But he was a mess.
Wow. And Dean, you talk about your friends, running friends. I don't know if you have too many of them, because when you went to relay races, sometimes you just do it on your own.
Well, let's digress a bit. So, after I ran the Badwater Ultramarathon, which is 216 kilometers, there was not a race that I could find, an organized race that was longer than that. But there was a 12-person relay race that was 200 miles. And I asked the race director if I could just do it solo as a team of one. And he thought I was crazy, but he let me try it. So I ended up running. That was the first time I ran 200 miles. I just did this 12-person relay race without any other team members.
That's insane. So in terms of then the longest that you've ever ran continuously without stopping or without a break, like can you tell us sort of what that looks like? Was it that it was 3 days running?
That was 3 days.
Yeah.
3 days of running.
And how far did you end up running?
350 miles.
Is that a world record? Like seriously?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's not really a category of continuous running.
It's stupid. I mean, my wife and I were watching this with the kids the other day, and they've got things like, bouncing a soccer ball, while hopping on one foot as a world record, but yet they don't have this. This sounds kind of crazy.
I know Dean ran on a treadmill for an extraordinary long time around in Times Square. Is that true? I remember that from one of your books, I believe. What is that true, or am I just remembering? Am I hallucinating here? Is that true?
Yeah, no, I ran for 24 hours on a treadmill, but not just on a treadmill. I was suspended 2 stories in the air on this platform in the middle of Times Square. You're right.
And that was for raising money, surely, yeah?
That was for prostate cancer. Raising money for prostate cancer. Yeah.
And speaking of prostate, how did you actually go to the toilet when you were suspended above everybody? I have to ask that question because I know it's a professional question, but how did you do that?
Yeah, so on this platform, there was a little table where I had all my food and beverages, and then behind the treadmill, there was one of those camping toilets. They're very low to the ground, a camp toilet. So, and every time I had to go to the bathroom, be it number one or big potty as my kids call it, I had to sit down on this little camping toilet, and there was a drawstring curtain. So I'd pull this drawstring curtain, and it would raise like this curtain or this 360-degree curtain around me, so no one could see me because I was being broadcast on all the plasmatrons, those screens.
Oh man,
they were actually broadcasting me as I was doing this. So I'd get off this treadmill, sit down on this thing, pull up the screen, this curtain around me, do my thing, and then get back up and run on the treadmill. And that's how I did it.
That honestly sounds like you're describing a nightmare. That really does sound like a nightmare. Try. After 20 hours of running on a treadmill, my legs were wobbly, and to try to sit down on this little toilet. Oh, man, can you remember how far you ended up running after the 24-hour period?
Yeah, I think I ran. I don't know how many kilometers. I think it was 148 miles.
Wow.
Gee, that's over 200.
It's just crazy, man. Like seriously, it's just next level. It's just next level.
It's nuts. I speaking of running a really, really, really long way. Now you ran across America, and then you, and then what did you do? Did you fly home, or what did you do after the long drive? Well, the long run.
Yeah, well, I decided that thought I'd run home, so I turned around and started going back.
You can't see everyone's faces here, but they're all just going, this is getting...
Can you remember what year that was, Dean?
11, I think.
2011.
I think it was 2011, yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
I've also run, I'm reflecting now, I did a run in Australia. It was called Summit to Sydney. So I ran up to the summit of Mount Kosciuszko and then ran to Sydney. And that was... How many? I ran 100 kilometers for 6 days in a row.
Wow. So, Dean, and I want to finish up by talking about your books as well too. But just quickly, toughest run of everything that we spoke about. Obviously, I'm guessing that would you say the Antarctic, or would you say Death Valley was the hardest, or is there something else that was the toughest?
Yeah, there's lots of choose from.
Yeah, no, I ran a 6-day race in Atacama, in the Atacama Desert, which is the driest place on Earth.
Yeah.
It's in South America. So the place we ran, the guy said that, it hasn't rained here. And I said, well, how long? He said, and as long as we've been keeping records, there's never been rain at this place. And it was self-supported, which meant you had to carry everything you needed on your back for 6 days. And, during the day, it was up about 40, 42 degrees. And then at night it was below zero. It was below freezing. And you're sleeping on the ground. You're sleeping on rocks. So that over the course of those 6 days, I basically experienced hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a really tough endeavor. And
that sounds horrible.
That was probably the toughest. Yeah.
Wow. When did you do that, Dean? How long ago was that?
I think that was in 2000 and maybe 2010.
Wow.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely horrific. Well, before we run out of time, Dean, I do want to ask you just a little bit more about your nutrition and your diet. Is there any musts that you would recommend or that you've found to be beneficial to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think diet overall is really important in what I do for both recovery and longevity. So I always talk about a diet, with saying, listen to everyone, follow no one. So I can tell you what I found to work best for me at this point in my life, but I think people should experiment and find what works best for them.
Sure.
But I've come to rely just on food as medicine. I mean, I think it was Hippocrates that said, let medicine be thy food and food be thy medicine.
That's right.
400 BC, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a mantra of our show, 100%. And I think all good health comes from eating fresh, eating local, wherever you possibly can. So obviously that's something that you practice.
Yes, it is. And I also, I grow a lot of food in my garden myself. So I'd like to eat a lot of my own grown food. And I eat a lot of herbs because I think you guys know the antioxidant value, the auric value of like rosemary and oregano is some of the highest of any foods out there. So I spice my food with a lot of fresh herbs. I like to say if I can't pick it from a tree or dig it from the earth or catch it with my hands, I don't eat it. So nothing in a bag. I try to avoid anything processed and refined. Obviously when I'm out, doing these races, I'll eat an energy bar that's in a wrapper, of course.
Sure.
But just my everyday diet, I don't.
No, that's right. There's supplement, and that's what we always say as well too. Supplementation is fantastic to supplement, but what are you supplementing? You're supplementing
healthy diet.
Absolutely, it's absolutely foundation of all good health and performance comes from eating good quality food. As you said, lots of antioxidants, lots of fresh fruit, lots of colors. Dean, very quickly, not very quickly, I've left a little bit of time. Do you want to talk us through some of the books that you've written and where people can find out more about you, your website? If you could talk us through that would be great.
Yeah, well, I'm very proud to have written 5 books. Fantastic. And, I think, writing is like running. It's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
Yeah.
So I think that, to be a good writer just takes, for me at least, takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of word crafting. It takes a lot of, looking at a sentence and trying to envision it in, different forms. But, my books have been bestsellers in Australia. So a couple of them have. My first book was called Ultramarathon Man, Confessions of an All-Night Runner.
Yep.
And it was kind of a coming of age book. And that was, my first book. And I just wanted to write a book initially just because it was something I wanted to do. I wanted to jump out of a plane. I wanted to swim with sharks. I wanted to write a book. And I wrote a book thinking if, 5 of my buddies buy this, I'll be lucky. And it became an international bestseller. So I followed it up with a couple others. My most recent book is called A Runner's High, and it's somewhat of a sequel to my first book. So it's kind of looking at my life after 3 decades of doing this and how I've been able to keep doing it. Both, how did I make a living doing it? How has it impacted my relationships with my family and my friends?
Yeah.
How am I still able to run 100 miles, well into my 50s? And what do I eat? But it's storytelling. I'm Greek. So, starting with Homer, the Greeks were good storytellers. So I'd like to spin a good yarn. And I think Aussies are great storytellers and they appreciate a good story. So I think that's one of the reasons that these books have done well in Australia.
Yeah. And I like the tagline you've got there as well too. Older, wiser, slower, stronger. And that's great. I mean, again, Dean, if you're running into your 50s, that is an absolute accomplishment. And I think a lot of people would love to know more about your mindset and how you've actually been able to, learn from pushing yourself and what others can learn from that as well too. you've got another book there, Steve, as well
Yep,
too.
this
Which
is the
he's
Road
got
to Sparta.
and Dean, I'll let you know, he's got a little bit of toilet paper stuck in the back of this book. And I said to him, because he's using it as a bookmark, I'm like, we can only guess where he's wearing it, right? Where he's reading
Where I'm
it.
reading it. Unfortunately, is in the same place you described where you were hanging 2 feet up. That's where I read. I've read all your books. They're brilliant. They really are. Well, you wrote a book while you were running with your daughter. Was one of the books that I loved reading. And is it 26.2? Is that the name of that book? I can't remember now.
Yeah, Run 26.2. It was called Run 26.2 Stories of Blisters and Bliss.
That's it. Yeah.
Wow.
And he actually wrote it while he was running.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's an amazing story. Just the performance that you do. You're an inspiration to people. You inspired me to do an all-night run once, and I'll never forgive you for that. I did. It was a charity one, and it was 96 kilometres.
Yep.
All night through bush. Because I thought, well, if Dean can do it, he's sort of my age. I'll do it.
Yeah.
That was a dumb idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I almost died.
Yeah.
It was terrible. It was hallucinations. It was.
But you're pushing your limits. You find out
definitely
more about yourself, and this is the thing as well too. We're very altruistic, and then how you can use those experience to inspire and encourage and lead other people as well too. So that book is called The Road to Sparta.
Yeah, I love this one. I love the Greek origin. I grew up in Melbourne where there's a big Greek community. I learned a bit of Greek speaking down there. So I liked the Greek community. It was very beautiful. And about the story of the marathon where the first person to run a marathon died.
Yeah.
So, let's keep doing that forever. Yeah. That doesn't sound like it's just
it was a message, right? He ran to convey a message, and when he got there, he literally gave the message or handed over the message and died.
Yep, it's Greek history. Dean, you want to just quickly for the last minute or two?
That's absolutely right. He ran from the battlefield of Marathon where the Greeks defeated the Persians, and when he got to the Acropolis, he proclaimed, Nike, Nike, or Niki, Niki, which means victory, victory. We are victorious. And then he died.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, the footwear company Nike, that's where they got their name.
Right. Yep. It's the goddess of victory or something, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Goddess of Athena is the goddess of victory, but Athena Nike is the goddess of victory.
There you go. There you go.
Amazing, isn't it? Lovely story. And we're all doing marathons now, and crazy people.
And honestly, Dean, Steve we've literally had conversations about you on and off over the last few years because Steve has said that you're one of his inspirations, obviously, for running and everything. And I think it's absolutely amazing what you've achieved. It would have been loved to have spent some more time with you. But lastly, if people want to find out about your books, where can they go? Do you have a website? Obviously, you're a New York bestseller, so people can buy your books, I'd imagine, on Amazon as well, too. Is that correct?
Yep. My books are pretty widely available. So you can go to my website is just ultramarathon.com. But someone said if you Google Dean, that I'm the first Dean that comes up.
Wow.
So,
there you go.
Just Google Dean and then maybe put in a K for my last name, and then you could look at my website, or I'm on social media and all that kind of stuff.
Well, Dean, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I know Steve does as well too. And again, guys, if you're interested in Dean's books, please go and check out his website and Google Dean K, and that'll come up. And Dean, thank you so much for your time, mate. It's been absolutely fascinating. I know Steve's been absolutely chuffed and looking forward to having you on board. So, and we wish you all the best. Any last thoughts? Any new projects that are coming up, Dean, to leave us on?
Well, I'm always working on something new, and hopefully, probably now it's looking at 2024. But I'm hoping to run from the lowest point on Earth to the highest point on Earth.
What?
Wow, where is that, and where is that?
Everest.
Well, I bet you guys. I bet you know where the second one is. It's
I know
question.
Everest. Yeah, I can't believe you can run Everest.
Well, I mean, it'll be fast hiking. It'll be as fast as I can get up that mountain.
Yeah,
but the start is at the Dead Sea.
Right.
So Dead Sea to Everest.
So Dead Sea, which is like in Israel?
Oh. Yes.
No. Really?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
The Middle East to sort of China border.
How far is that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest problem with doing something like this is the passports and the permits.
Oh, of course.
I would leave tomorrow if I could, but it's unfortunately crossing borders is not so simple.
No. And probably all uphill too, I imagine. That would be a bit of a problem.
Boom. Oh, that's terrible. Well, on that low note, thank you, Steve, for that bit of pun humor. Dean, Thank you. We wish you every success. Thank you for being on the podcast today. And look, hopefully we'll get to speak to you again real soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. You know, a piece of me lives in Australia and it forever will. So I love the Aussie spirit, and best wishes to you guys. And I hope we can all share some footsteps together one day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for doing this, and it's been a pleasure personally for me too.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Well, look,
Cheers,
thanks,
guys.
Dean. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And Steve and I will be back next week with some more.